You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Please join us at the Open Door. We discuss solidarity, subsidiarity, economic democracy, and nonviolence in light of Catholic social teaching. We explore how to move from discussion to political change. Culture and politics, to be sure, are interwoven, so we care deeply about education and the arts. Our questions often lead us to report on the projects and promise of the American Solidarity Party.
Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hannock here with fellow panelist Christopher Zender. Tristemente, nuestra amiga Valerie Niemeyer has a back-to-school conflict in claiming that she lacks the power of bilocation. We can only say that we will miss her. Now, today, we are going to explore the thought of servant of God Romano Guardini, a widely influential theologian whom both Pope Benedict XVI and Pope Francis deeply admired. BTW, so did Flannery O'Connor. Guardini is often thought of as a unifying figure in the Church. Our welcome guest is Christine Myers-Miller. She is a graduate of the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for Studies in Marriage and Family in Washington, D.C., and is the Director of Adult Faith Formation, Marriage and Family Life at St. Bernard of Clairvaux Parish in Tulsa. Dr. Myers-Miller researched Romano Guardini in depth for her doctoral thesis, studying the topic of Christian responsibility for the world. She has published essays in the Catechetical Review, Humanum online review, and in the important theological journal Communio. Let's begin, as we always do, in prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. Let us pray. O God, who have taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant that in the same Spirit we may be truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. To get us started, Christine, could you tell us a bit about yourself? Have you always been an Okie?
Well, I do come from Okie stock. So my family has been in Oklahoma for, maybe about 100 years. And my dad worked in oil, so we moved around a bit when I was growing up, but the family settled back in Oklahoma again in the 90s, and I finished growing up here, did middle school and high school in Oklahoma, and love Oklahoma. So it's really a great place. So I know sometimes the middle of the country gets called the flyover zone, but I wouldn't live anywhere else. So I'm happy to fly to the coast and visit, but I'm very happy to live in Oklahoma. So
your view is better sooner than later?
Well, I didn't attend school in Oklahoma, so I'm not a part of the great competition between Oklahoma State and the University of Oklahoma, but that's a popular rivalry around here. So we take our sports pretty seriously.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So Christopher, our guest, has kindly introduced herself. Do you want to carry us forward?
Now, let's begin. One thing she hasn't mentioned is she studied at the John Paul II Institute. Maybe she could describe for us what that was like, and whether the institution, how it reflects the thought of John Paul II.
Yeah, I'd love to. So this is a wonderful place to study. It's really a gem in the life of the church theologically. They have a very balanced approach. So they're steeped in the tradition, but open to the new contributions in philosophy and theology that were brought by the Pontificate of John Paul II. And right now in the church, that doesn't describe every theological institute. So their fidelity and then also their receptivity to the Pontificate of John Paul II, I think, is very important for the church as a whole and for the church here in the United States. So they're focused very much on receiving John Paul II's insight, which is tied deeply to the Second Vatican Council, that you can really only understand the human person in terms of love, that human beings were created from love and for love, that Christ has revealed to us the reality of God, a triune God, one substantially, but a communion of persons, and whose life is love. And that really love has everything to do with truth, and truth has everything to do with love. These two things go together, and they provide the foundation for a very rich anthropology that touches not only on human sexuality, the body, gender issues, marriage and family life, but really work, economy, the nature of our being embodied in the world. And it's a wonderful place to study. So it's very challenging. They drive their students pretty hard to go deep in philosophy and theology, but it's a very rewarding place to study. So I'm grateful for my time there. I would say that I went there already very much convicted of my Catholic faith and my desire to be a disciple of Christ and to follow him wherever he led me. But the John Paul II Institute helped me understand the world. It helped me understand kind of the shape of our modern world, how it related to the ancient and medieval world, Christendom, and the Christian faith, and really brought a kind of healing to me, because I went there realizing that there was a disconnect between the faith that I was pursuing and living and the world that I was living in. And it was hard for me to reconcile them. There were things about the Catholic faith that I couldn't understand. I couldn't incorporate into a whole vision or a synthesis of how I understood reality. And my studies at the John Paul Institute helped me kind of diagnose that and grow in an understanding which deepened my convictions, my faith convictions, and gave my mind a place to rest. So I'm grateful for that. It was beautiful. I hope many students will go there. So maybe someone listening to this podcast will go catch the bug and go to the John Paul II Institute. That would please me very much.
You talk about, so it sounds like what you're saying before you went there, you say your mind was formed by what seemed to be reality, at least the modern reality. What sort of things, what was the bone of contention between what you were thinking and what the Catholic Church was teaching?
Well, I think, I was public school educated. I was not Catholic school educated. So public schools, K through 12. And then I attended Vanderbilt for my undergraduate and did secondary education in English as my major. I love literature and already had a sense of like the aesthetic and beauty and symbolism that drew me very much. But I think imbibed a lot of relativism, also a kind of skepticism about our ability to know reality or know the truth. I remember sitting in middle school science class and learning that the desk in front of you isn't a desk. It is a conglomerate of molecules and pieces and parts. It has no wholeness of itself. It's spackled, material, meaningless material that's spackled together, and now you call it a desk. And I think because of the kind of intellect that I have, I absorb that very deeply as a way to understand the world, how to understand reality. That, that's very much a Cartesian view of the material world, that it's all random pieces that have been grouped together to form something. It's very different from a classical understanding of form, and that things have natures and they're intelligible, etc. So I loved Aristotle. When I read Aristotle at the JP2 Institute, it was like he gave me the world back, because he said, if you want to know the world, open your eyes and observe it. It speaks, it's intelligible, it tells you about itself. You don't have to doubt your ability to come to a common sense knowledge of what things are. Everything doesn't have to be held in doubt. deconstructed and reconstructed based on experimentation or something. So that for me was very liberating, to realize that there was so many things that I could know by a careful, attentive, humble, obedient observation of reality. I think that I had been taught to be skeptical of everything, and that leads you to nihilism and to a place of really profound self-doubt as well, because you don't know how to grasp the truth. And we have a great need of truth as human beings. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but
well, what I want to know right off is, in that whole process, where are you left with the unpaid bills on your desk?
Well, God has been very good to me. So I managed to go through all of this, education with coming free of debt. So that's a great thing. And I've been liberated then to be able to serve the church. So the unpaid bills on my desk are paid by St. Bernard of Clairvaux Parish. And here I have a beautiful assignment to bring the Catholic faith to adults and to support marriage and family life in our parish. So that's my task, and that's how I earn my bread and butter.
Could you give us some particulars on your position? What does it involve?
Yeah, well, it's sort of a dream position in many ways, because I have enormous freedom to provide programming for adults. And so I have the joy of being able to prayerfully discern where I believe God is asking us to study, what he's wanting us to do, and then to draw together classes. So I usually provide a couple of classes throughout the year at different times of day, morning and evening, to reach people who are retired. They can come during the day very easily and prefer that. Also, people who are still working, they'll come in the evenings. We provide childcare for evening programming for parents so that they can be hands-free. And their children are entrusted to competent, loving adults, and they then are free to apply their minds and their hearts to what's set before them. So it's exciting. Our diocese actually just went to restored order. Our bishop announced that here in the preceding months, that we're returning to a restored order of the sacraments. So that means that by 2028 or 2029, I forget what the goal is, our children will receive confirmation and First Holy Communion in third grade. This puts a lot of pressure on us to give really quality formation, and also to form our parents, because obviously there's no carrot to entice them to bring their children for a later confirmation, or a stick to beat them with. So we have to actually provide them with something that they find meaningful. So it's a welcome challenge, because the faith of parents is essential to the handing on of the faith to children. They have a contribution that nobody can make but them. And so we want to equip them to do that with conviction and joy. So that's the task that's laid before me and my coworkers here. So we're happy to take it up with God's help.
Now, you mentioned freedom. Has the absence of Monsignor Pat Gallus enhanced your freedom, or not? Or is he still lurking in the background? You might remember, audience, that Monsignor Gallus was a recent guest of ours, and he's removed himself to a monastery.
Monsignor Gallus is a wonderful man, very deeply loved here at St. Bernard's and in the Diocese of Tulsa and Eastern Oklahoma more broadly. So, and very much by me. He's been a spiritual father to me. So he hired me here in 2015 and has been a spiritual director and guide and friend and father to me for all these years. So whenever he asks me to do something, then I'm always ready to follow. So I was very happy that you are a longtime friend of his, and so grateful to be invited to be a part of your podcast. So through him.
I don't know, just a brief aside here and a sidebar. He has recently upended Chesterton research.
Oh, no. Oh, that's great, actually.
An unpublished poem, fragment, was analyzed carefully. in a recent issue of Gilbert, and it turned out the analysis was not quite up to snuff.
Uh-oh.
And so Monsignor wrote a letter to the editor, Dale Alquist, pointing out that there would be a better way to decipher the handwriting that Dale himself had tried to decipher to reconstitute this poem. Yeah. So he's a literary expert as well.
He is. So that's a great contribution that he's making to Chesterton research. And he is witty and intelligent like Chesterton. I'm sure that there's a supernatural friendship there between the two of them. So that's a delight. I think he mentioned to me that he made that discovery. So congratulations to Monsignor.
They were both of them. Well, Monsignor still, but they were both of them. Chesterton, in an early fashion, committed to the Pritikin diet.
The Pritikin diet? What is this?
No, Chesterton was not committed to the Pritikin diet. He was a beer and bacon man from beginning to end. Christopher, could you get us back on track, please?
We should probably start talking about Romano Guardini.
Oh, maybe.
Maybe could, somebody, people might not, I've actually never read Romano Guardini. So, an introduction would be fine. I mean, especially explain to people why an Italian is writing in German.
Yeah, Romano. So Romano Guardini he's a great figure of recent history, and often figures of recent history are the most forgotten. So, but there has been a little bit of a revival of interest in Guardini, and a lot of his works aren't translated into English. So I had the joy in my doctoral studies of discovering a lot of his untranslated works and reading them in the original. And I'd love to see more of them translated at some point so that we can benefit from his work. But he was born in 1885 in Verona, Italy, to an Italian family, obviously. He's the oldest of 4 boys. His father was a merchant, so he did trade work. He was also involved in diplomacy for the Italian government. When Guardini was just a year old, they moved to Mainz, Germany, and Guardini grew up there. Of all of the Guardini siblings, he was the only one that really felt German. So he was formed so deeply by the culture, the people, the intellectual climate there that he stayed. He took German citizenship. He studied at Tübingen as a youth, experienced a very profound conversion in that time. And along with a childhood friend, entered seminary and was ordained to the priesthood in 1910. During his habilitation studies at Bonn, he wrote an article for Maria Lach Abbey. So the abbot there, Ildefonс Herweger, he was part of the German liturgical movement, a real inspirer of it, and invited Guardini to write an article. He wrote Spirit of the Liturgy, 1918. So this is probably his most famous work. And if you're familiar very much with the corpus of Ratzinger, Cardinal Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, you know that his work on the liturgy borrows the title, Spirit of the Liturgy. He took that from Guardini with the hopes that his work would in some way participate in the same sort of renewal that Guardini's work in 1918 inspired. There was a lot of enthusiasm about improving the lay person's ability to participate in this great act of the church, the worship of the holy liturgy of the church. So that springboarded him into kind of a position of fame in 1918. He was a very young man at the time. He also, about the same time, was introduced to the German youth movement, Quickborn. So Germany, in between the wars, saw a lot of renewal of youth who really wanted a different life for themselves. The First World War was very traumatic to Germany. Germany was blamed for it. There was much poverty. There was a lot of kind of low morale. And the young people of the time were really searching for a way forward and a new identity and something to latch onto, something to inspire them. Of course, that created unfortunately a fertile ground for National Socialism and the Nazi movement, which started to gain control and influence in the minds and hearts of people at that time. But it was also a fertile ground for a renewal of Catholic faith and life. And so Guardini was a part of this youth movement, Quickborn, was a leader of it for many years. He was let's see, what year was it? I took a few notes here. In 1923, a position was created for him at the University of Berlin. So the Prussian Minister of Culture created a Catholic Weltanschauung chair for him. That just means worldview. And invited him to this professorship at the University of Berlin, where Guardini was enormously popular. So what he did, he studied dogmatics for his doctoral work. But what he did as a professor is he took the light of faith that he received from his conviction, his Catholic convictions, and the purity with which he received the teachings of the church, and he allowed that light of faith to shine upon earthly realities of culture, maybe questions of the faith, but to examine them with a kind of freshness. He had a phenomenological approach, which was also the school of phenomenology was really taking off in between the wars, as well as personalism. The dramas that Europe suffered in the 20th century really gave birth to a renewed sense of the need to regain contact with reality, which is what phenomenology was trying to do, regain contact with real things and come to know what they were. And personalism really wanted to recover the dignity of the human person, which had been denied and denigrated by these totalitarian regimes and fascism, which had crushed so many, and come to see the individual as something less important than the whole in a way that was harmful to man and caused great suffering. So Guardini was living right in the middle of all of these movements, and his lectures were enormously popular. He would be in large lecture halls. They'd be packed with students, Catholics, non-Catholics. Berlin is not a Catholic city. It was a Protestant city at the time. Since then, it's been, very much influenced by being behind the Soviet bloc and communism. So this was not a Catholic atmosphere in which he was living, but his work was so interesting that it drew a wide variety of people. He taught them to seek the truth. Truth was very important to Guardini. It's really the heart of his life's work, was to pursue truth, to know it profoundly, and that truth in the light of faith, to combine those together. It's very fascinating to many people. So he was shut down from that position in 1939. So as the National Socialist regime took power, they pulled him into the office and explained to him that when the government has a worldview, there's no Catholic worldview taught in the university. His name was put on a death list by the Nazis. However, Guardini was so famous and also an international figure because he was Italian by birth and very obviously Italian in his look and also his name. You couldn't escape that he was not a native German. And these things put him sort of on a little bit of protection from an immediate extermination by the Nazi regime, but nevertheless, his positions were stripped from him. The German youth movement as well was shut down in 1939. They had to go and try to destroy documentation that would cause them to be especially suspect by the Nazi party, and everything became a bit quiet. Guardini spent those war years really focusing on his intellectual work, and it was very productive actually for him. So
how would you you're talking about being a phenomenologist, how would his procedure theologically and philosophically differ from, say, Thomas Aquinas or maybe the Neo-Thomists?
Well, I think he differs from, so Aquinas is a realist, right? So he believes there's an objective reality and that knowledge comes from a reception of an objective world. That is a very different position than what we find as the rise of modernity comes about. So the work of Descartes casts doubt on our senses and what we can honestly know through common experience. And there's a desire to only confirm and know what can be experimented upon and verified by data. Phenomenology wants to recover that objective reality, that there is a world before us, and that this world presents itself, and that we are capable of experiencing it and growing in knowledge with it. So he differs from Aquinas in the sense that Guardini was not very interested in doing scholarly work, which would require a comparison of thought among different scholars, how they've interpreted things, and an analysis of that. Thomas Aquinas was an absolute master and genius in doing precisely that. He brought into dialogue the ancient philosophers, Aristotle in particular, through at his time, the recent rediscovery of the works of Aristotle through Muslim philosophers. So Aquinas was absorbing Aristotle via Muslim philosophers and bringing them into dialogue with Christian theologians, the great Christian theologians of his time, and then commenting through his own prayer and contemplation and discernment upon their contributions. He's an absolute master at that. That's why he's the angelic doctor and is so important for the theological work of the time. But Guardini, what he wanted to do was regain contact, like a fresh contact with reality, a fresh observation of it, realizing that the contribution that he would give wouldn't necessarily be of the caliber of a Thomas Aquinas or a scholarly level, but it does, though, have a kind of freshness and newness to it that provides a kind of a renewed wonder and a renewed contact with the world that we desperately need if we become so subjective that we think that we're creating the meaning of the world. And Guardini helps correct that. It's like, no, the world itself has something to say to you and is profound and beautiful and wondrous. And you need to get back into touch with what's outside of you and allow that to enrich the inside of you. But we're not the creators of the world. We are inheritors. We are beneficiaries. We're recipients of this beautiful world. So that would be kind of a distinction. Both kinds of thought have a contribution to make, I think, to the life of the church and the life of the mind. They're just they're distinct contributions, though, if that makes sense.
Well,
Yeah, I guess because what I wonder about is that Thomas, along with Aristotle, said all knowledge begins with experience. Mm-hmm. So actually, even though forms of scholasticism became corrupt and began to be too much rooted in what the expert, the past experts had said, the past thinkers. Nevertheless, that's actually the foundation of Thomism. Mm-hmm. That's when you talk about a realist or a semi-realist. The natures of things are actually present in the things themselves, so we can actually experience them and come to know them. So I guess I wonder, the use of the term phenomenology too seemed to suggest Kant's phenomena, which is not reality at all. That's just the perception of reality. So would it be right to say that Guardini's approach is more affective with an A, and more maybe almost poetic in terms of trying to get people to rediscover what had been lost from the earlier tradition?
I do think that it would be accurate to describe his approach as poetic, as long as you maintain the depth of his work. That it's not romanticism and it's not subjectivism. So he comes to an approach to the world that is still informed by the richness of the Catholic tradition and the Western tradition is still behind him and inside of his vision. There's not an opposition there between Guardini or his version of phenomenology and Thomism, for example. So, and the approach of St. Thomas Aquinas. So his real gift was to allow the light of faith to shine upon earthly realities, and in that, new things come into vision that perhaps you wouldn't have seen otherwise about the human person or about a work of literature. So I don't know if that helps, but it's not simply his pursuit wasn't for, say, beauty or emotion or but he really wanted truth. So it's not simply to capture an experience of a particular emotion, etc., but to really get to the heart of things. So, and to do so in a way that is, I think poetic would be accurate for some of his work. Yeah.
I have I guess a follow-up question on method, but then I want to go ahead. You had mentioned theological anthropology earlier, and I want to go ahead to that. But first, the follow-up question. You might say that as a phenomenologist, Guardini calls us to a fresh vision of how things are in themselves. It's a vision that frames our experience in a new way. We see deeper. Now, might someone in a deflationary mood, perish the thought, but it's early here in Los Angeles, might someone in a deflationary mood say, yes, but that's all descriptive. And suppose someone says to me, I don't see things the way you see things. Mm-hmm. And I'm all for seeing things, but I don't see things the way you see things. How do we ever move forward from a discourse that is descriptive to the drawing of conclusions or the resolution of antinomies?
Yeah, and I think that is the great challenge that we have now, especially with the kind of subjective emphasis that we have in our culture, especially with freedom in individual vision, the desire to create my life according to how I want it to be. There's an orientation, like in our culture, toward reality that's very much intent upon shaping and upon directing it according to my will. So, if you will, a kind of freedom that is unhinged from a reception of truth. So when that is first and foremost, then the dialogue and the pursuit of truth becomes very difficult. So there is a sort of personal asceticism that has to be in place for the pursuit of truth, in which you allow truth to shape you, and you humbly place yourself beneath the search for reality and what it is, and you subject yourself to it. That doesn't fully solve all of the problem of it, of course, but it's absolutely essential. This is where, like, often the idea of pursuing truth in our culture today sounds proud. Remember that I presented an article by Guardini to a group of people here in Tulsa who are involved in the community as leaders in the community, religious and community leaders of other types. And this article about truthfulness was seen as very proud, but actually it's the opposite of that, because when you hold to the fact that there's an objective reality that we are both trying to understand, then we must humble ourselves before it. And I must allow myself to be changed by what I see. I have to take my interlocutor seriously and really address their concerns and what their vision is. That's sort of the sine qua non. There's no dialogue without that kind of personal attitude toward the truth. And in a culture that we have now, that's sort of a rare attitude. And I think that's part of our trouble in pursuing the dialogue, is that if you're not willing to let your vision be altered, then it's hard to enter into a conversation with someone and find unity. Guardini does talk about this in some of his later works about the challenge that we face in pursuing truth, because he's very influenced by Plato on this, but there's an abundance of truth. And And that means that there are multiple perspectives that you can have on something. And sometimes coming to a unity or to a decision, a decisive point about a particular topic is difficult. But he would say we must guard ourselves from a kind of skepticism that would, because of this abundance of what we're looking at together and the difficulty of the task, that we would simply put it aside. We nevertheless must pursue it. It's absolutely essential to the work of a university, for example, or to a society, that we would conform ourselves to what is.
Perhaps, and every analogy limps, perhaps we could speak of the aesthetic reception of a work of art.
Mm-hmm.
Vision is certainly involved, and we find ourselves seeing things, back to the things, in very different ways. But we have to stand before the thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you take one view of Caravaggio and I take another, well, let's make sure that we're viewing the actual work and keep returning to the actual work. So perhaps that would be a way to ground dialogue. And I think of a famous line from John Paul II. Let's call things by their proper names.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be before them. But that's a digression on a digression. Now, you mentioned theological anthropology. And as I understand your way of thinking about that, and Guardini's, before you can wrestle with the great moral issues of the day, and there are always great moral issues of the day, and sometimes they're just avoided and not wrestled with, and I think of slavery as an example of one, you have to have an understanding of who the human person is. And today we have very different views of what it is to be a human being. I mean, back to your desk, right? Well, same with being a human being. So how do you move from questions about what it is to be a human being to questions about how to live as a human being?
Well, there was a comment that Guardini made toward the end of his career. So after World War II, he was reinstated in the university. So first in Tübingen as a Catholic Weltanschauung professor, he was given his chair back, the same idea of chair. Then a few years later, he was wooed by Munich and brought back to Munich, and he continued in his professorship through the early 1960s. And so he saw the changes that were occurring in society and the post World War II era, and part of what he noted was when confusion reigns, we must return to the simplest things and the most basic realities, and we must look at them carefully. And so, just exactly to your point about if you're going to discuss a work of art, place the work of art directly before you. If you're going to look at the human person, place the human person before you and look at the different aspects of human life. And the different sciences have different contributions to make to this anthropology and this vision. I would say with one caveat is that the scientific enterprise can't be subjected to ulterior motives. And I'm afraid that we're seeing that very often in society right now, that if your scientists in the natural sciences or the soft sciences, the social sciences, are allowing themselves to be shaped by ulterior motives, careerism or monetary gain or bribes or self-promotion, and it's falsifying their work such that they're publishing articles that are not honest and not truthful, Here we have a complete breakdown of knowledge. When you're in that situation, then what you do is you create so much confusion that no one even knows where to find reliable information. And the pursuit then of man's good becomes nearly impossible when each person in their proper domain does not have integrity in what they're doing and pursue honestly the truth before them, to know the truth and to really express it as clearly and as accurately as they can. When that does happen, though, it doesn't, there are contributions that come from all sides. So I can give an example, and I wish I knew the woman's name. I didn't prepare this because I had no idea that we would wander off into these waters. But there was a woman who did research on the development of infants and small children, and she was not by any means a conservative person or a Christian believer, or she was a scientist, and she had secular views that are very common in our times. But what she observed was the need of a young child for its mother, that children have undeveloped nervous systems, and the regulation of their emotions comes through contact with their mother. Their mother is actually the one that regulates the emotional response of a child all the way through about age 3. And the implications of that, of course, for working moms is very clear. Her research was therefore rejected because it doesn't fit with the desire of a particular form of culture, a particular understanding of woman and her place in the world. And she had a terrible time publishing this work and maintaining her academic career because it didn't fit with an ideology. That's a problem. When we can't be honest about what's before us and speak truthfully about our findings and really observe them honestly and describe them accurately, then we cannot pursue our authentic good. That causes a complete breakdown in our society. And so I give that as an example because this is a beautiful thing, I think, about the Catholic faith. It's part of what captured my heart and my mind as a young person. The Church maintains that the natural truths of this world are not in conflict with the truths of faith, and they must all be pursued honestly. At times, there may be difficult reconciling them to one another or understanding how they fit together, but we hold in principle that there is no contradiction there. It also means that persons who do not share our supernatural beliefs that are beyond the scope of reason still have a place at the table in conversation about understanding the human person and building a society. So what's most essential is that inner integrity, the pursuit of truth and authentic good, which is an ethical principle that is accessible to reason, that is a hallmark of ancient philosophy, pre-Christian philosophy that's not inspired by divine revelation and is not an offshoot of Christianity per se, but has found a home within the Catholic tradition. So that's enormously important. And that's, I think, a contribution that the Catholic faith makes to the world that is extraordinarily valuable on every level, politically, scientifically, whatever it is that you're doing. Be honest, be truthful, pursue the good, right?
And truth remains the pivot.
Yes. And it requires humility and obedience. It requires it requires a conviction that the truth is worth pursuing and that you have an obligation to it. It's very refreshing whenever you discover the work of a scientist or a thinker who is convicted of that and stands by it. Their work brings light and is helpful to us. Yeah.
Christopher?
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk about truth and asking people to respond to truth, but even in the roots of empirical science, if you go back to Bacon, his adage that truth is power, right? Knowledge is power. When you talk about people who refuse to listen to the results of certain experimentation because it goes against their own interests or against their own ideas, I think what you're looking at is a what we might call a postmodern view of truth. The truth is only what truth is a grasp for power. So, so this is something we're talking about is deeply rooted in the corruption of philosophical thought in the West since the 17th century. How do we, when you're dealing with that kind of thing, where every truth claim is merely considered to be a power claim, and I can therefore, silence somebody who says something I disagree with or is not in my interest to hold, simply because of that reality. Is there any kind of dialogue that could be had in that kind of society?
Well, I'm afraid that that's a dialogue that often ends in the blood of martyrs. So, where there is no reception to the truth proclaimed, then it can come to blows. Of course, might makes right in the end, right? Which is the kind of society that we're living in right now. I would say, though, that we have to be careful to not despair of the power of truth's beauty, and when it is presented well, it has a power to convict. So, I at the John Paul II Institute became very familiar with the work of Hans Urs von Balthasar, which I have some misgivings about in some ways, but I will say this about his work is that he helps restore an understanding of the importance of the transcendental attributes of being, that the world, that everything that exists shares in being, shares in those transcendental attributes of truth, goodness, unity, and beauty. From my own experience, what I came to understand as a young person in, attempting dialogues across lines of faith and conviction was that when I explained the truth to someone, but I failed to show truth's goodness, I failed to bring forward how this truth that I wanted to share, I wanted to talk about, was good. That means that it's for you. It is for your flourishing, and it's lovely. That when I failed to show truth's goodness and address really the person and the way in which this truth actually holds for you something that is essential to you and something that will benefit you, that I was failing to really give them the truth in its fullness. The truth is only fully itself when it's fired from the inside with charity. So charity and truth go together. The Holy Spirit is the spirit of truth and the spirit of love. And the truth of God's creation that he's implanted throughout the works of his hands, they're also filled with goodness. They're for us. And so I think that when we present the truth in a way that shows its goodness, we start to gain hearts, because there we start to pull on man's desire for the good, which is written into the depths of us. And so we shouldn't, I don't think, despair of this dialogue about truth. I think maybe we just need to continue to work on presenting truth in a way that reveals its profundity. There's a convicting power to it. I was once invited, this is an odd thing, so I was once invited to give a talk at a conference on human sexuality, and it was from a very liberal perspective. And so these were people that were engaging in all sorts of structures of intimate relationships that are kind of scandalous or definitely not common, especially in a Christian context, right? So like polyamorous relationships where you have multiple lovers and you all have a pact and etc. So they invited me to come and give a talk on chastity. So this is kind of an amazing thing. So I went to some of their talks and I listened to them, and what I realized is that there was a complete forgetfulness of a creator and of a reality that preceded them, and that these were people that were trying to find a way forward to build a life of love and of intimate relationships. They wanted ethical relationships, so that's why they were requiring consent among all of these partners. There was also a kind of despair present in the reasons why they were doing that, because they had been hurt by previous attempts at marriage and they kind of gave up on it and thought they weren't good enough for it or they weren't capable of it. And so they were trying to find a way forward. So when I gave my presentation, I went all the way back to the beginning to why is there something instead of nothing? And where did all of this come from? And what can we say about this? And we have to make a decision, like Ratzinger says in his Introduction to Christianity. What is our first principle? Is it logos or is it chaos? Is it at the beginning of everything, is there mind, or is mind an accidental product of what is otherwise a meaningless and chaotic process? You have to make a choice, right, and make a stand on that position, because it's an a priori philosophical position that you're going to take about life. So why take the one where God exists? And what does that mean? And what does that mean about the body? And what does that mean about sexual love? And so I presented for them this vision that John Paul II gives us of theology of the body and the great meaningfulness of the body and of human love. Its power to be an icon of the divine love within history, etc. They were blown away. I don't know if any of them afterwards had conversions, but they came up to me and they said, I had no idea that was the Christian understanding of sexuality. It is so beautiful. It is just so beautiful. And my prayer for them is simply that at some point that there would be a break-in of God's light and love for them, that they would realize that vision of beauty is something that they can take a stand on and that they can participate in, that they don't have to live in this other path, which is ultimately very despairing and carries with it a lot of sorrow and suffering. I often like to tell people life is hard. It's going to be hard no matter what you do, but the hard things of life are so different lived within a profound relationship with your Creator. And with the conviction of the goodness and the truth of the life that you are living, it's a completely different experience. It's a lifting of a heavy burden. Christ's yoke is gentle and can be borne because it's born within something much greater than yourself. And everyone is longing to participate in something that is greater than themselves, something that's meaningful, that's solid, that's exquisitely beautiful, that is inspiring. That's in the heart of every human being. So we got to show them that. That's what truth is about. It's not simply that I have something and you've got to obey it whether you like it or not. It's like, no, let me show you what you're invited to, and that it's for you. It's not against you, but it's for you. Is it hard? Yes, it's hard. But it's life-giving and it's beautiful, and in the end, it corresponds to the most profound desires that you have in a way that you're not going to find anywhere else. So,
come and see.
Come and see. Yes. Let me introduce you to someone. Yeah, come and see.
So you're really not talking about necessarily a philosophical approach to these things. It's more of a, I guess, an effective approach of getting. It's not strict philosophy where you're actually producing argumentation. You're saying you're offering an alternative to them and trying to show them the beauty of that alternative and to maybe excite their wonder.
Yeah.
And further pursuing. I
mean, philosophy certainly has a place within that, because that's our love of wisdom, and our human minds are thirsty and desirous of truth. So, I mean, that's part of the beauty of Catholicism. It's not fideism. It isn't simply a proclamation of a faith that goes beyond your capacity to understand. It is that, and if it weren't that, it wouldn't be as satisfying as it is, because it's introducing us into this mystery that is just mind-blowingly, unbelievably beautiful, and you're challenged to take it up as true and to live out of it and watch it transform you, right? And not it, but him, this lived relationship with the Creator and the Redeemer of your existence. But philosophy definitely has a place in it, and I think there's an essential contribution for those who discover philosophical truths and can present them in a way that is compelling. So one of my favorite podcasters is Jordan Peterson. I know he's a controversial figure for many, but he's someone who had the courage to say what he was seeing as harmful about some things in our culture and what was happening around him at great cost to himself, with conviction and out of really a charity, because what he's seeing is harm coming to people that he cares about. He's not a mean, selfish person. He's someone who is discovering things about the world and reality, and it's led him into a dialogue with Christianity. In a way, he's discovering the Western tradition, both its philosophy and its theology, and how it sheds light upon the world around him. And it's fresh and it's interesting. He's a psychologist, so he's coming from a psychological perspective, and in some ways he reminds me of Guardini on that, because he's discovering things, and he's analyzing scripture, and he's analyzing psychological trends, he's analyzing politics, he's analyzing these things, not from a fideistic perspective or as an evangelist who's out to convince you to be a Christian. That's not his perspective. He's simply showing you what he's discovering, and how it's for you, how it's for your good and for the good of society to discover these things. So that is, I think, an essential contribution for philosophy to make. Yeah. Anyway.
Christine, we're past the end of the hour. Are you are you good for another 5 minutes?
Oh, sure. I'm good for it. I love talking, so you can get me going. I'll just keep going.
I think of ways of presenting philosophy.
Uh-huh.
My way is to put together a lot of footnotes. What you need is a really lot of footnotes.
A lot of footnotes. Yeah. Well, if you want to understand the history of it, you need the footnotes.
But prescinding from that, the last question that I'd like you to address is, what might Guardini say, here we are today about AI?
Oh, yeah, it's terrifying, isn't it? Yeah, I saw that question. I'm like, oh, that's a hard one. What would Guardini say about AI? At the end of his life, looking at what was before him, and in some ways, AI is just another exponential growth on the technocratic and technological advancements that we've already seen. It just bumps it up to another degree. But I think it's similar in many ways of a technology that escapes our grasp in many ways. This is an amazing capacity that we have as human beings to create something that, well, quite honestly, could enslave us and escape our power of control and our ability to handle responsibly. In all of this, what really comes to me is Guardini's contribution to the importance of truth, and along with it, his hope at the end of his life that the real place of transformation of the world, the real pivotal place of where culture is created and shaped and guided, is the conscience of man. So the place in which all of us stand before God alone, responsible for ourselves and responsible for our lives, with a responsibility toward truth, a responsibility toward goodness. And he turned really his attention at the end of his career toward cultivating those conditions in which man's conscience could be formed and be healthy. So the need for prayer, the need for silence, the need for contact with God. So I would say, in regard to AI, those two things I think are really important. First of all, that whenever we develop a technology, we need a corresponding growth in our interior responsibility for it and our acknowledgement of that responsibility. And this is tricky because I'm responsible for things that you aren't, and vice versa, and you can't be responsible on my behalf. This is something where the buck stops at every person, right? Every person contributes to the improvement or the decline of our world by their personal stance before God and the way that they live their lives. So that's that interior freedom, or that interior need for the formation of conscience, so that we can exercise our freedom responsibly. The other part of that is the conviction of the importance of truth. So AI gives us the ability to lie in ways that are absolutely profoundly destructive. And if there was something that needed to be examined, I would think that it's and regulated, it would be the way in which AI lies. Now, there is such a thing as art and the fabrication of, creativity and the fabrication of artificial things, but where you create a world of deep fakes and an inability to distinguish between fact and fiction, between truth and reality, you are destroying your society. I listened to someone, and I forget the name of this person. They were suggesting that they're involved in the process of this creation of AI. And they were suggesting that it needs to be made illegal to create artificial persons, that needs to become a punishable offense. So creating bots, for example, that influence social media and opinion polls, etc., that the creation of fake persons and of deep fakes and of false images needs to be punished and needs to be regulated in a very strict sense. And I think that makes a lot of sense. That we really need as a society to be convicted about the importance of truth. We've come to a real crisis on this. And the challenges that we face in dialoguing and pursuing truth, understanding it, cannot be an excuse for allowing us to continue on this path. We're on a path of self-destruction. We must recover the importance of truth and begin explaining that, showing that, and standing by it at all levels of our society. So I think hopefully Guardini would agree with me on that one. I think he would. And I'll just, by that then throw out Guardini's book on the virtues. I encourage everyone to buy it. It's available in English, and he has a chapter there on truthfulness and how it's the foundation of society. And I think his book on the virtues would be a wonderful thing for people to read and allow the patrimony, the legacy of Guardini to bear fruit in our American culture today. So,
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on here.
Well, we just might have some final words from Christopher, though.
All right.
Oh, I don't know about that. I don't think I have anything else to say, except I was going to point out that I had a similar experience with you many years ago, back in the 90s, I think it was. I was on a panel discussion with in West Hollywood, a very seemingly hostile, anti-Catholic hostile environment. And one of the panelists was a Hollywood producer, full of all Hollywood types. And the other one was the chief ecumenical officer for, I think it was the Universal Church of God, a gay and lesbian church. So at one point she challenged, I was asked about basically my approach to truth. And I expressed, I did believe that there was truth. There's some things which are truly false and that are truly true. And so she launched off into this thing about the idea that I'm right and you're wrong has led to all sorts of persecution and evil throughout the world. So she was lulling everybody to sleep at that point. So I just said to her, I said, well, but if I disagree with what you just said, wouldn't you have to say that I was wrong? And she said, let's ask the audience. Well, the most amazing thing was that these people had never heard the concept of truth like that. They had never heard the principle of non-contradiction. They were absolutely excited over it. I was mobbed at the end of the meeting by people asking me questions about this. So there's a kind of basic common sense that still exists even in Hollywood. If you could find it in Hollywood, you could probably find it almost any place, maybe even rural Ohio. And so I think you're right about that. It's just something we didn't get into today, the whole question of culture, right? When you have a deep skepticism infecting the culture, it's very difficult to work against that. Mm-hmm. And so even if you make some advances, you often feel like you're being pushed back at the same time. So it's just
onward.
Random thoughts.
Yeah.
Well, I always think it's good to have a plan B, which is why we here on the Open Door are taking names. When we run into people who disagree with us, in case the dialogue doesn't ultimately work out, we are taking names. With Plan B, well, you don't want to hear Plan C. So let's return, as we always do, to the source of things, God's Word. And the gospel for today is from Matthew. At that time, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman of that district came and called out, "Have pity on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not say a word in answer to her. His disciples came and asked him, "Send her away, for she keeps calling out after us." He said in reply, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But the woman came and did him homage, saying, "Lord, help me." He said in reply, "It is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Please, Lord, for even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table of their masters." Then Jesus said to her in reply, "O woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed from that hour. Come, Lord Jesus, come. Thank you so much, Christine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Boing. All right. That was great. Really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me on. And always a pleasure to meet a friend of Monsignor Gallus. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you all are doing this podcast out in California, of all places. So in the Lion's Den.
Christopher used to live here.
Where are you now, Christopher?
Central Ohio.
Oh, Central Ohio. Okay. I did my master's at Franciscan out there.
Okay, yeah, but it's about 2.5 hours from where we live. We live almost in the center of the state.
Uh-huh.
A very significant town here in Ohio, population 400.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And he carries the flag for the American Solidarity Party.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. Yeah. I'm a village councilman, so that's...
Yeah.
That's a small flag, but he keeps waving.
We mostly talk about sewer systems. That's our, not many high political philosophical discussions in the village of Hartford Village Council. It's mostly about the sewer.
But you got to know the territory. All right. Thank you.
You got to take care of those necessities to get to the other thing.
I know. Yeah. Well, most of local government is about moving water from one place to another.
Yeah.
Think of the ancient Romans. That was their focus. All right. Godspeed to you all.
Thank
God
you.
Bless.
God bless.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.